Part 1. The Discovered Path. My reasons for going to Siberia were rooted in something less than academic glory. It was not the lure of adventure that called me to this remote, unforgiving landscape, but an escape from a crumbling marriage and a career veering off course. In truth, I welcomed the isolation, the brutal chill, and even the stark, monotonous expanse of snow that enveloped the land like a shroud. The expedition, funded by a modest university grant, aimed to study thawing permafrost and its ecological impacts. A cause vital but remote, much like everything else about my presence there. It was the middle of November, and the sun was a rare guest, briefly checking in before the relentless night reclaimed its dominion. That morning, like every morning since arriving, I had set out from camp, which consisted of myself, an aging tent, and little else. My field gear was heavy, suffocating, yet somehow I felt perpetually exposed to the cold that penetrated any layer I put on. A fog, thick and disorienting, had rolled in from the east, swallowing whole the sparse pine trees and shrouding my surroundings in impenetrable white. I pushed forward, though each step seemed futile, carrying me deeper into obscurity. The world had become soundless, save for the crunch of my boots and the occasional distant groan of bending trees under the weight of the snow. Abruptly, the ground beneath my feet changed. From the crunch of snow to a thud, hollow, uncharacteristic of the dense soil I had tread upon for days. Curiosity overruled caution, and I began to clear the snow with my hands. What emerged was not the dark, frostbitten earth, but wood, old, yes, but solid beneath a thin veneer of ice. It was a door, I realized, a crude wooden door laying flat on the ground, partially buried. The discovery was ludicrous, impossible. No settlement had existed in this part of Siberia for over a century. The native tribes that once wandered here had disappeared into history, leaving behind barely a trace. Yet, here was a door, hidden and preserved by permafrost, now exposed by the same ecological shifts I had come to study. I should have marked the coordinates, returned to camp, and documented the find. But isolation plays tricks on your mind, distills it down to its rudiments. Curiosity, in this case, got the better of me. With hands numb and trembling, either from the cold or the burgeoning realization that I was on the cusp of something inexplicable, I wrenched open the door. Beyond lay darkness that felt ancient, profound. There was a staircase leading down, each step groaning under the burden of an unwanted visitor. The air shifted as I descended, colder if that was possible, and laced with a subtle, unidentifiable scent that brushed past stale and edged towards sinister. When my feet finally met the flat ground, the air felt different, charged, almost electric. Ahead, the darkness seemed to pulse, not with light, but with the absence of it, a deeper darkness, throbbing gently like a heart. My headlamp pierced this shroud sparingly, reflecting off surfaces that suggested cavernous depths, and perhaps foolishly I proceeded. The ground underfoot was no longer soil or wood, but something smoother, harder. With each step, the echo seemed to argue that this place was much larger on the inside than the small mound above had suggested. My academic mind scrambled to rationalize the dimensions, to propose theories that could explain the impossibility. My advance was finally arrested not by a barrier, but by a sound, so faint initially that I dismissed it as a trick of my ears, strained by silence. But it grew, a soft, rhythmating tapping, not like someone hammering, but rather like a cautious being, signaling from the depths. It was not random. It was a pattern, repeated with intention. Panic whispered to retreat, to climb back up to the world of light and frost, where laws of nature held firm. But there I remained, frozen by the need to understand, to record this anomaly. My hand hovered over my journal, ready to scribble down the encounter when the tapping ceased abruptly. A new sound replaced it when I felt more than heard. A vibration through the ground, up my legs, rattling my teeth, a resonance that suggested something large, something alive, shifting in the profound dark. The breath I drew was sharp, crystalline with the realization that whatever lay in the bowels of this unearthed door, it was vast, aware, and awake. And somehow, I understood that my intrusion had altered something fundamental. There was no going back. Not now, not after the air had thickened with an imperceptible heaviness that felt almost sentient. In those initial seconds, standing in the vast pulsating darkness, all my scientific grounding dissolved into the ether around me, replaced by raw, primal dread. Yet it was that very dread that rooted me to the spot, a paradoxical paralysis born out of an overwhelming need to comprehend the incomprehensible. A new sound emerged from the gloom, a low, droning hum, cycling through an oscillating pitch that seemed to speak directly to the marrow of my bones. The floor vibrated underfoot. The ancient slumber of whatever dwelt here was ending. The sound grew in layers, complex and asynchronous, as if multiple mechanisms of an old and arcane machine were slowly coming to life, each with its rhythm, yet all intricately linked. I had left my hand hovering over my journal, a futile gesture towards academic rigor in the face of unknown terrors. With a trembling hand, I scribbled down each detail, a desperate bid to anchor myself to reality through the act of documentation. As I wrote, the illumination from my headlamp began to dim, swallowed gradually by an encroaching darkness that seemed eager to erase the boundary between light and shadow. The air shifted again, and I sensed movement. At first, just impressions of shifting mass far too intricate and massive to fully grasp. The ground felt less solid, as though my weight was suddenly too much for it. I dared a few steps forward, each movement feeling like a betrayal to my rattled instincts. It wasn't long before I encountered it, something both in my path and enveloping it. My light, now a feeble glow, fell upon a surface unlike any geological formation I knew. It was organic in appearance, vast and convoluted, with textures that whispered of ossified wood or petrified organs. The surface pulsed gently, a visual echo of the heartbeat-like throbbing from earlier. I reached out, compelled by a force I couldn't name, to touch it. The moment my fingers made contact, the texture beneath them fluctuated, hard as ancient stone one moment, yielding like flesh the next. The hum intensified, sending a wave of vertigo that nearly buckled my knees. This was a mistake, a grave intrusion. Pulling my hand back, the air around me constricted, and the reality of my surroundings shimmered menacingly. It was as if touching this ancient sentinel had affirmed my presence to whatever governed this place. I realized then that this was not merely a cavern or a forgotten structure, but something else entirely, something alive. Above the faint hum and the distant murmurs of rousing movement, another sound encroached, a high-pitched keening that seemed to mimic the wind outside, yet carried with it an emotional cadence of mourning or forewarning. This cry cut through the layers of ambient noise, sharp and directive, pulling my attention towards a narrow passage off to the left. The decision to follow that sound felt inevitable, as though my course had been set the moment I opened the door. Each step was heavier than the last, not just with the burden of my gear, but with the growing certainty of my own impending reckoning. Muted light began to manifest ahead, not my headlamp, a failing beacon by now, but something else. Azure and indistinct, it flickered through the passage like the pulse of bioluminescence, beckoning deeper into a heart I was now certain was hostile and awakening. I noted, faintly, the absurdity of my commitment to empirical scrutiny in such an encounter. Was it determination or madness that propelled me forward towards that eerie glow? As I pondered this, I stumbled upon a threshold, beyond which the air grew markedly warmer, and the faint blue light coalesced into a clearer, radiant glow. Crossing this boundary felt like breaching a sacred plane, and the world as I knew it shifted palpably. Behind me, the passage sealed shut with a sound like the soft closing of earth upon a coffin, and ahead, the glowing expanse beckoned me towards truths that no human was meant to unearth. The vast, aware entity in the depths was no longer just stirring. It was waiting for me. The floor before me pulsed rhythmically, as if the ancient cavern were drawing breaths of anticipation. The azure light now swirled around my feet, casting peculiar shadows that seemed alive, shifting and contorting into forms too sinister to fully acknowledge. Ignoring the terrifyingly anthropomorphic shadows, I pressed on, drawn by the inexplicable allure of that radiant glow, which seemed increasingly sentient the deeper I ventured. There was a palpable intelligence to the cavern's responses, an organic synchrony between my movements and the ambient changes around me. Each step seemed to incite a reaction, soft murmurs from unseen crevices, subtle shifts in the light's intensity, and increasingly rhythmic pulses from the ground beneath. The entity ahead, vast and profound, communicated not through language, but through these interconnected phenomena, a symphony of dread orchestrated for an audience of one. My notes, once meticulous, had become erratic, the feverish script of a mind teetering on the brink of understanding and madness. What scientific approach could be applied in a realm so defiant of empirical laws? My research, whatever objective it had initially had, was morphing, now driven by the need to survive, to endure this ordeal long enough to behold the center of this abyss. Indeed, the deeper I went, the more the cavern seemed to contract and dilate, breathing in a grotesque mockery of life, funneling me towards an inevitable conclusion. Whether it was the entity's core or merely a trap set by the cavern's unknowable intellect, I could not ascertain. The certainty of my path dissolved into a mere hope that forward motion could still be synonymous with progress. The cavern walls, no longer merely architectural barriers, throbbed with a sickly pulse, veins of azure light coursing through them like blood through arteries. Was I walking within the bowels of a colossal beast, or beneath the gaze of a sentient space, aware of my every breath, my every tremor of fear? A sudden clarity pierced my jumbled thoughts as the glowing expanse widened into an immense chamber. Here, the azure light pooled into a luminescent lake, the source undeniably organic, as if the light itself was a liquid, breathing mass. The lake's surface rippled as I approached, not from any breeze, for what wind could exist in such a tomb, but from the deeper pulsations of the entity below. Then, without a warning, the chamber echoed with a new sound, a resonant, low groan that seemed to emerge from the very walls, floor, and ceiling, enveloping me in its omnipresence. The groan was neither threatening nor welcoming, yet it vibrated within me, resonating with primal fears. Instinctively, I knew this was the entity speaking directly to its intruder. "I am here," I whispered, unaware until that moment that I had intended to speak. The response was immediate. The groan ceased, and the lake stilled as if awaiting my next action. It was a sentinel moment, standing at the edge of this bizarre luminescent body, every nerve ending alight with the electric sensation of being observed, evaluated, perhaps even understood. I did not move. Instead, I knelt, my research journal slipping from my fingers and landing with a muted splash into the glowing liquid. It floated, momentarily, before being slowly drawn beneath the surface, leaving behind a trail of ink that clouded the bright light with dark tendrils. My breath caught in my throat as I watched my notes disappear, absorbed by the entity or perhaps archived in some unfathomable library of alien curiosities. In their descent, they seemed to carry with them the last vestiges of my denial. The cavern, no, the entity, it knew I was here. There was no hiding, no fleeing, and no ignoring its immense presence. Forward was the only way left to me. Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself to finally face what awaited in the heart of this otherworldly sanctum. Prepared, or so I hoped, to confront whatever impossible truth lay beneath that serene and monstrous lake, the heart of an abyss that had called me, drawn me, swallowed me whole. With each tentative step, the lacustrine glow before me seemed to brighten, not with a welcoming warmth, but with the cold fire of revelation. My footprints vanished into the azure pool's surface, leaving no mark, as if even the liquid itself refused to acknowledge my existence or dared not keep a record of this invasion. Yet, with each footfall, I felt less like an intruder and more a summoned acolyte, called to this ritual of awakening and horror. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and ancient damp, clung to my lungs. Each breath became a labor, imbuing me with the volatile essence of the place. The cavern, or what I had once deemed a cavern, continued its metamorphosis, revealing itself not as a series of geological accidents, but as an organically curved, living architecture, an otherworldly machination cloaked in stone. As I approached the center, the humming began. Low and ceaseless, it filled the cavern, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, up along my spine, and whispering into the hollows of my bones. I could no more have ignored it than I could have stopped my own heart from beating. It seemed as if the sound was a key, crafted perfectly, to unlock something primal and untouched within the deep recesses of my reason. The lake before me churned subtly, rhythmically, as if mirroring the pulsations of a giant heart beneath its surface. The glow intensified, concentrating toward the middle where the depths could not be seen. I found myself at the edge, peering into an abyss that returned my gaze with an opaque mystery. Tentatively, I stretched a hand towards the luminous liquid. What was I searching for? Validation, understanding, redemption. The surface recoiled at my touch, then surged forward, enveloping my fingers in a cold, gelatinous embrace. This was no mere water. It was a medium of consciousness, a sentient expanse reaching out to me, eager to communicate through touch. Pulling my hand back, the skin tingled, adorned with traces of the liquid light that slowly faded as if absorbed by my own flesh. Had I been marked or merely tested? Driven by a mix of dread and anticipation, I finally spoke, my voice steady yet foreign to my own ears. "What are you? What do you want from me?" The response was not in words, but in visions that surged up from the depths of the lake. The surface rippled violently as images swelled beneath it, a kaleidoscope of alien landscapes, bizarre geometries, and unsettling silhouettes of creatures that defied earthly classification. These were not communications intended for human understanding, but snippets of cosmic awareness, shared through a medium that transcended language. Each vision that pulsed into view seemed to probe my psyche, looking for a foothold in the human experience, perhaps seeking to understand or to modify. I stood transfixed, my mind absorbing these glimpses into what I could only assume were other realities, other existences so profoundly separate from our own. My pulse thundered in my ears, an erratic counterpart to the cavern's rhythmic breathing. As the visions grew more intense, I realized that this entity did not just reach out into the space it occupied. It reached across dimensions, pulling at the threads that wove reality together. "Why me?" I rasped, overwhelmed by the enormity of the revelation. As if in answer, the images shifted, coalescing into a clearer picture. Newton beneath the apple tree, Archimedes in his bath, then shifting to more abstract representations of epiphany and revelation. I was not here to witness, but to understand, to partake in an unending quest for knowledge that stretched beyond the mere physical into the essence of what binds the universe. The lake stilled suddenly, and the cavern seemed to pulse with a finality, as if it had made its point. The azure glow dimmed, resting now at a serene hum below the threshold of discomfort. A path to my left, previously obscured by the density of the light, became apparent, winding deeper into the darkness. With a mixture of apprehension and a newfound resolve, I knew what I had to do next. I must follow the path, delve deeper into this interconnected nexus of horror and wonder, for each step forward was a step towards an incomprehensible truth. I moved, my steps synchronized with the cavern's palpitations, deeper into the labyrinthine depths, where light dared not linger and truths too vast for the human mind awaited.